Dr. Kaushal, however, is here, and we had a very interesting conversation with him what's going on in Miami-Dade. So let me ask, can you tell the rest of the people too?
Right. Hi. Yeah. The short answer is we don't really know what's going on in Dade. The problem is I think it's basically an evolving system. Just to get started, I mean, one of the biggest differences is the way we are in Miami-Dade. It's going to be coming out. It's primarily a fast ED-based triaging system. Now, that being said, beyond that, everything is left to open. So there have been talks about activating the whole team, including the whole cath lab team, so everyone gets activated for a fast ED score of 6 and above. That's basically, at this point, this was the recommendations by the EMS doctors. So that being said, at the same time, what Miami-Dade lets us do is really the amount of differences, or really the non-uniformity, if you will, of each individual hospital system is pretty significant. So we have at one place a complete university-based academic center, so to speak, where, again, just to give you an idea of the chain of information that gets flowed, EMS brings in a patient, ER physician does not evaluate the patient. The first person who evaluates that patient is the neurology resident, who calls the stroke fellow, who then calls the neurointerventional fellow, who then calls the neurointerventionalist, who then activates the team. From that down to, we have other systems where essentially the ER physician is the first person to see the patient, and he directly activates the cath lab team. So given that we have a reasonable amount of disparity between, or non-uniformity really, between the individual hospital systems, our whole idea was to really basically go with outcome-based metrics, right? I mean, our whole goal in this whole pre-hospital notification beat or evolving system of care approach, our goal is still the metrics, right? I mean, which basically immediately or automatically translates down to patient outcomes or having good outcomes. So one of the main metrics being the door to groin time, since we're talking about pre-hospital notification. So the final thing would be that if, as long as your door to groin metrics are pretty sound, does it really matter how you get there? So with that premise, each hospital system basically, or each institution, would have that amount of liberty, so to speak, to chalk out their best path, but with the common idea of reaching that goal of having a door to groin time within a certain number. What that number is still not decided, unfortunately. Now, the only uniform system, again, would be this pre-hospital notification system, which is basically using a fast ED score. There have been questions and talks about whether an activation system of having a fast ED of 6 and above really makes sense or not. Based on certain data that Brijesh showed, it seems like a race score of 5 and above seems to have a predictive value of maybe about 50 to 60%. So that's pretty low. Now, having a fast ED score of 6 and above, we really do not know what the positive predictive value would be. That too in a new atmosphere, in a thing where we're trying it out for the first time, it might be pretty dismal. So I mean, there are basically questions about whether activation is really the way to go about or not. The second level is obviously notification, which is what Memorial is doing right now, which is what we're doing. But also within Miami-Dade, there are actually individual EMS agencies who, based on the area, really decide what the best way of triaging is. So for example, in Hialeah, where I am based mainly, it's going to be a totally different system. There is a baseline of using fast ED. So everyone agrees to that being the uniformity in the system. Now beyond that, there will be even activation with a score of above 6, which again we're fine with. Beyond that, in Hialeah, what we're doing is we are actually using a phone-based EMS notification system. So essentially, in Hialeah, the EMS directly calls me on my cell phone for any fast ED score, 1 or above, basically. So they would essentially call directly on the phone, where we would talk about the patient. We would basically do the exam together, so to speak. So for any stroke alert, we receive a call and then we calculate this. Again, our focus also is primarily on cortical science, and that's what we've been teaching the EMS also in our educational series. As soon as we see or we hear about a cortical sign, we calculate the score, and I might even activate my team at a score of maybe even a 3. So it's completely left to us in that sense, with, again, the caveat being that 6 is considered still to be an activation zone. So that part is primarily going to be uniform, but beyond that, any escalation of care that you want, beyond that, EMS allows us to do that, and individual agencies can make the choices in doing that, and individual hospital systems can basically, again, chalk out a plan, whatever works best for their system. But we all have to agree that with the final goal obviously being of patient outcomes, and the strongest metric being a good door to groin time. Now, within that, the other problem what we are encountering is how do you come to that? I mean, it's nice and easy for us to say that having a good door to groin time. Our problem that we're running into is that we do not have a common set of variables or numeric metrics that we need to come up with that basically sways the pre-hospital notification system, and also who does that analysis. You guys in Broward and in West Palm Beach, you pretty much, all of you guys are giving the data to FLPR. We are as well. But EMS by themselves might not be looking at just FLPR. So they also want to look at data analysis done by Miami Dade Stroke Consortium. So basically, we do not have a clean avenue, let's put it that way. And I'm not saying one better than the other, but what I mean to say is that there is not a uniform even data collection mechanism, and when we talk about either data being given to FLPR or data being given to Miami Dade Stroke Consortium, we're looking at all variables in a comprehensive stroke tab. And a lot of those variables, as we know, are not really too important towards an EMS pre-hospital notification system. So our problem is twofold right now, and that's why I said in a short answer that we don't really know what's going on. The problem is we are working towards a pretty aggressive system. We're not looking at ways or avenues as to how this would make an impact, and if we need to tweak it, in which direction, because we really we're not probably at this point at least not collecting the right data elements towards making that learner choice. So for that, I mean, it's still an evolving system. There's probably going to be some trial basis pilot studies that will happen with individual data analysis from individual institutions, which we might give to the EMS in a blinded fashion. I mean, in the sense that each hospital gives that data to EMS, and the EMS analyzes that data. But really speaking, right now, it's not tied up very well. And that's one of the reasons why I think having a tri-county forum where everyone would participate would actually be of immense value. Unfortunately, I don't think it really happens that way. I mean, we end up still, this is called a tri-county coalition, but it still ends up being mainly a Broward coalition. And so, I wish we had a little bit more compact system, but I do hope that we'll evolve towards that. But that is basically the gist of what's going on in Miami-Dade.